Sometimes in the blood vessel chapter, you get to the end and it starts talking about blood pressure, and things just they kind of get mushed together a little bit. And I feel as though students miss this concept that resistance, which is equivalent to blood pressure, right? Because more resistance means more blood pressure. Resistance is determined by these things. How long are your vessels? How big are your vessels? How thick is your blood? And then how clouded with cholesterol are your vessels? Does your blood flow nice and straight, or does it go tink, 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 tink all through the blood vessels? So let's explain these three things and how they impact blood pressure. Blood vessel diameter is by far the most important factor in determining your blood pressure. Peripheral blood vessels are used to measure blood pressure since they're the more numerous than centralized blood vessels. So, in general, the smaller the vessel, the more pressure to push the same volume of blood through. And as a result, blood pressure increases. Blood vessel diameter is the most variable of the factors that affect blood pressure, and it also, being most variable, it also has the greatest impact. It changes all the time, it instantly, within seconds, all the time, to adjust to internal cues from your body. So, like for example, if you get hot, the hypothalamus sends a message that you need to radiate away heat through your skin, and peripheral blood vessels dilate in the dermis to increase blood flow to the limbs. And then this increase in blood flow, coupled with the cooling effect of sweating, it helps cool all the blood and consequently reduces your core temperature. In contrast to this, if it's cold outside, your hypothalamus sends a signal for blood vessels to constrict, and this reduces blood flow to the periphery, which has the consequence of limiting the amount of blood that even enters the tissue. And as your blood vessel diameter changes, so does that resistance, so does that blood pressure. Just a personal note, because I have frostbite on my nose from many years ago. Frostbite is from prolonged blood vessel constriction. The other reason that diameter impacts resistance so strongly is that the radius of a blood vessel varies inversely to the fourth power of resistance. That may sound like complicated math, but really, here's an example. This is what it means. If the radius of the vessel doubles, the resistance will decrease to 1/16 of its original value. Right? That's a lot. If the radius doubles, the resistance drops to 1/16. So with larger vessels, they reduce resistance. Small vessels increase resistance, and there are so many more small vessels that you have than larger ones. A longer vessel creates more resistance, which increases pressure, and this is why blood pressure naturally increases as you grow from a baby to an adult, due to longer vessels, not due to stress. Well, I mean, blood pressure can increase due to stress, but your vessels don't lengthen. Resistance as it pertains to total blood vessel length is it's an easy concept. The longer the blood vessel, the greater the need is for resistance. As people gain weight, they need to build miles of small blood vessels to vascularize all of the new tissue. And this means that peripheral vessels will increase, which can increase your blood pressure. That's one of the reasons why obesity is correlated with high blood pressure. I always remember this by remembering that a child's blood pressure is it's quite low, right? And then an adult's is quite high. Therefore, length increases pressure. As our vessels elongate, our pressure is increased. Blood vessel diameter is still by far the most important factor in determining your blood pressure. Peripheral blood vessels are used to measure your blood pressure since they're more numerous than those centralized ones. The next factor that affects resistance is blood viscosity, which refers to the resistance to flow. Fluids like maple syrup, molasses, motor oil, and ketchup, luscious. Oh, that's a hot dog, and whatever that is ruined with mustard. Anyway, when blood viscosity is low, such as when you're well hydrated, your red blood cells align very nicely and they flow smoothly together through the vessel, and that reduces friction, reduces resistance, reduces blood pressure. When you're dehydrated, your blood becomes kind of thick, viscosity increases. The red blood cells become more concentrated, bumping into each other and bumping into the vessel walls. This increases resistance, this increases pressure. Blood is thicker than water, according to the saying. Correct. Blood viscosity is defined as the internal resistance to flow related to the thickness or stickiness of a fluid. The thicker the fluid, the more difficult it is for the molecules to keep flowing along. Maple syrup flows more slowly than water because the syrup is more viscous. And actually, when you take maple syrup, it's a complicated process of finding the right trees on a little bit of a slope. And I don't know if you know this, but maple syrup is kind of pumped through the lines to a big collecting tank because the maple syrup becomes viscous and then less viscous, viscous and less viscous, and it generally like pumps itself through the lines. Generally speaking, your blood thickness is pretty constant. It's kind of slow to change. However, if there's a really abnormal increase in red blood cells, as in the case of polycythemia or blood doping or anemias, blood viscosity will increase, as does resistance and blood pressure. So dehydration reduces the plasma in your blood in comparison to formed elements, and this increased viscosity, it just makes it more difficult for the blood to flow. And finally, the last factor that affects resistance is turbulence, which describes irregular blood flow through the vessels. Turbulence can be caused by plaque deposits, as shown here in the diagram. Plaque deposits increase resistance and they increase blood pressure, especially near the heart, where turbulence adds to afterload. Plaques create a situation like permanent vasoconstriction, combining really high viscosity and small vessel diameter. It all just elevates blood pressure. If you acquire plaques of arterial sclerosis because you love bacon, like me, well, like everybody, right? Except vegetarians. But they have bacon, which is kind of, it's not bad. It's not bad. Your blood's no longer going to flow smoothly through your vessels with these plaques. Instead of a nice straight line of flow, as in the top picture, the red blood cells, they start to hit these plaques, and that disrupts their blood flow. So then they start hitting against each other, and that increases friction, resistance, and pressure. This turbulence creates more resistance to flow, and so it increases blood pressure. So if you have arterial sclerosis like me, it's not that the plaques just vasoconstrict your vessels, they do, but they also cause this turbulence. And this is why arterial sclerosis is like it's like a double hit to your blood pressure and perfusion. I just want to note that I most likely have plaques because I have really high lipid values, but my blood pressure is a dream. It's good. It's always like 120 over 80. Boom.